Guys, welcome to GraphQL Radio, where we discuss all things GraphQL. Today we're doing something a little different. We're having a new segment of our show called Speaker Spotlight. This is an opportunity to get all the speakers in the GraphQL community to get on the show before they deliver their prolific speeches. Today we have Tommy Lillehagen. Did I say that right, Tommy?
Pretty much. I'll give you a pass on that one.
Dang. And he works at a company called Hudl, and has been working with GraphQL for quite a while now. And he will be speaking at GraphQL Europe about using GraphQL in a mesh network to enable real-time collaboration. Welcome to the show, Tommy. Thank you so much for being here. I know it was really short notice, but really appreciate you being here.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So
glad to be here. Before
we get into your talk, I want to kind of understand who you are and your background.
Yeah, of course. So I'm originally from Norway, hence my difficult surname to pronounce. Won't dwell too much on that. I've been with Hudl since 2015. And we, as you said, we introduced GraphQL at a very early stage there as we built out our messaging platform. At the time, I was a developer on the core tribe, so we're adopting a Spotify structure for our product team. But at the time, I was working on the core tribe, building out core components for our system, and we were just then building out the messaging component. After that, I've moved on to different tribes. So I'm currently the engineering director for competitive and elite, where we're looking at, I probably should have started with what Hudl is doing in general, but we're a sports analysis and video company. So we're providing video tools and analysis tools for coaches and athletes around the world to really up their game and improve their performance, both in-game and during training sessions. And we have recruitment platforms as well for especially for the US market. So that's quite an exciting project to work on. Also get a lot of contact with the sports market in general. And something that we've seen recently is the need for real-time applications in the elite space in particular. So working with elite teams around the world to really provide them the tools that they need during the game to be able to review their performance and tweak their performance during the game.
Awesome. Before we get into real-time and GraphQL, you said you were building the different systems of the app itself. Why did you pick GraphQL?
That's a good question. At the time, it was pretty soon after it started getting traction, but we saw a lot of benefits from it. We started out with a very mobile first strategy for the messaging app, because a lot of our athletes, especially in the US, they need to communicate on the go, facilitate training sessions and games, get some of that communication out there early on. So we really pushed for mobile, and as we're building out this whole new API, some of us, me included, had been looking at GraphQL for a while and kind of saw the benefits of that from a mobile client perspective. And also in terms of the agility that you can move at when you have a defined backend and not having to go back and forth between backend developers and front-end developers all the time as we're expanding that API and focusing on delivering value to our users as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I love that, and a lot of the pros I see from different companies that are using GraphQL is this removal of friction between many teams. And another thing is where the experience is more enjoyable than what you were doing before. What was Hudl on prior to GraphQL? What were you serving APIs with, REST or?
Yeah, we employed REST across the entire stack pretty much. Pretty recently, prior to that, we started moving away from a very monolithic code base into microservices. So we have this Bifrost layer, which is kind of internal REST calls between services, essentially. I remember taking a REST strategy for the rest of the platform as well. So a lot of the clusters up until that point, I guess, had been kind of pulled out from that monolithic code base and adopted a similar strategy. But then around this time, we built out this new tribe called Core. We started focusing kind of the reusability of components across the different verticals instead of focusing on one vertical at a time. And that's where we started realizing that like the applicability of the endpoints that we're building out and how that should be consumed in the rest of the organization and so on. So that's where one of those appealing points around GraphQL really stood out.
So when you want to adopt this new technology, there's a lot of, if you're a high level at your company, then there's probably less friction. But someone who maybe a mid-level engineer or junior engineer wants to bring some kind of technology, most of the naysayers for adopting GraphQL from my research are one, the infrastructure cost, which I don't understand, but it's like, well, it's a cost of infrastructure to even make this. The second is there's overhead in a new language and API. And then three is the tooling is not the same as REST, right? And as a pretty big company compared to most, how'd you guys deal with those, like, I guess those gaps in the implementation at the time, like not having proper, like REST has so much tooling. If you have like a REST, a REST purist, they have all the tools that they could use. How'd you guys approach that when you guys, switched over to GraphQL?
Yeah, I think we had a lot of benefit from having adopted a microservice model. And today, even we haven't really adopted like a God schema in that sense. So that allowed us to kind of de-risk the adoption of GraphQL and the messaging squad. We have this squad structure, right? So each tribe, because it's multiple squads, and the squad that was overlooking the messaging platform, we had quite a lot of autonomy, and also had the backing of the CTO, Brian Kaiser, who's very good at kind of staying on top of the latest technology. And I had several conversations with him before I started preaching for the adoption of GraphQL in the messaging platform, I guess, and kind of got his go ahead for that. Around the infrastructure costs and everything like that, as I said, we kind of had this microservice architecture anyway, and we needed a new service for this messaging platform. So the cost of infrastructure wasn't really a problem. It was more about like how this API was going to interface with other squads across the company. And at the time, we kind of slowly built it out. So at the time, it was mostly contained within the core tribe. And also with tools like GraphQL and things like that, it's pretty easy to kind of convince people that it actually provides a lot of benefits as opposed to being a friction point, because you have like self-documentation, you have this web IDE that you can use to explore the API, try out your methods and stuff like that. And we're going to see a second phase of that happening now that we have more GraphQL endpoints across the different services. As I said, like they can't contain into different portions of the product. But as part of our bigger move towards improving our quality processes now and introducing more automated testing around those endpoints as well, we're going to see the entry of QAs into that part of the system, and how they, like, starting from scratch, familiarizing themselves with GraphQL. And in general, that's been pretty smooth, I would say. Like, people generally get it pretty quickly. And as I'm sure you also experience, like, GraphQL is one of those technologies that you kind of, it's a bit hard to explain all the benefits just walking through it. But once you show them GraphQL and show them some of the APIs and how that like all ties together, it generally makes people very excited about it.
So I asked this to a lot of others, like guests we have on the show. What's your favorite thing about GraphQL? And what's your least favorite thing?
Oh, yeah, that's only one thing, eh?
Only one thing.
I think Me personally, I'm quite a back-end oriented guy. And one of the things I like about it is essentially the strongly typed object-oriented API. Kind of your code is your documentation in a sense. Like it very closely reflects that. The way that you're representing your system in a very objective manner, like you're trying to reduce any application-specific interfaces in your API, right? You kind of try to represent the entities that you have in your system rather than anything else. And that way, it also allows you to move quickly, not only on the front end, but also on the back end, because you have these constraints and you use that as a framework when you're developing your system. It kind of naturally alleviates some of the pain of growing, I feel like.
To kind of like follow on to your point right there, having that entity model in your application, it lets everybody kind of understand what the hell is going on, right? Even if you're creating new systems, if the entities are the same, you know that a player or a sports player is the same thing across systems. I work in the job space, in the HR space, so a job is a job is a job, no matter where you get it from. And just some adding to that point.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of helps you ensure consistency in an ontology and having a consistent perception of a specific term across the company. And also, like tying back to object-oriented design and stuff like that as well, having those good abstractions in place is actually a framework for you to kind of design your system, and it kind of limits issues. Like if you have performance issues, for instance, like you kind of naturally constrain that to a small portion of the code base and help ensuring some of that decoupling along the way as well.
Nice. So now, what do you dislike?
There's not a ton I dislike, but also like GraphQL isn't a silver coin that can solve all your problems if it just absorbs. If you adopt it just blindly and just hack away, it can be quite a challenge to untangle. Just to tie back to that, I'm going to run through an example with messaging. I said like we saw a lot of benefits of adopting GraphQL early on for our messaging development, especially since it was very mobile first. However, we did quite a few mistakes along the way, and this was kind of very early stages around like when Relay was starting to take shape, and not all of the best practices in the community was really defined at the time. So we started doing things like having IDs being strings instead of ID and not being a globally unique ID. We didn't have enums in the first version, and that was partly due to the library that we're using. We were like .NET heavy. We didn't really have a good support for enums at that point. So we had strings instead. Those that later on involved changing a contract between a mobile client and multiple versions of a mobile client and the backend, and actually changing the signatures of those fields and types, which was quite a bit hassle to untangle. So I would say like GraphQL is a great system if you have those initial requirements set up front and that you make those right decisions to begin with.
Yeah.
But once you make a tiny mistake up front and kind of like haven't thought through that, and if you're not careful enough, then you can get yourself into a bit of a tricky situation. But essentially what we ended up doing, which is kind of contradicting the GraphQL mentality, but we essentially ended up with a new version of that endpoint to untangle some of the mess, because that was quicker given the state that we were in and the adoption that we had of the platform at the time, to kind of start fresh and tidy up all those things instead of introducing a new field that was kind of slightly misnamed just because we couldn't have that clash with the previous field that had the string instead of a return type.
I've been in that situation. So you guys are very mobile first, like you were saying, or you wanted to, you were building this with a mobile first mindset. How many mobile developers do you guys have?
So just a slight correction to that. Like, I think for messaging, we were very mobile first in our kind of rollout strategy.
Okay.
Just because of what I said, like one of the key benefits that we identified for the messaging part of the product was that we could then help the coaches and the athletes with some of the pain points that they were experiencing, especially in the US, about like reaching each other and facilitating training sessions and also like going through analysis and stuff on the run. So not having to be in front of the computer to start like talking about your performance from the last game, already starting having those conversations when you're on the coach or the bus on the way back from a game or something like that. So we have a lot of we're quite focused on the front end web technologies right now. We do have, I'm not quite sure about the numbers of web iOS and Android developers at the moment, but we have a smaller pool of that compared to the front end chapter of our business. Another thing we're also looking into there is technologies like React Native to reuse some of the front end developers across both web and mobile development. So it's kind of a bit in motion there, I guess, but our main focus is essentially the web platform right now for the competitive market. And then in the elite market, we have a thick client desktop application, which is used much more in an offline setting traditionally. And that's where the real-time collaboration piece and the peer-to-peer networking comes in as the kind of next evolution of that to help enable more real-time collaboration during the games and training sessions.
Well, that's a perfect segue into your GraphQL Europe talk. For the listeners, GraphQL Europe is the first GraphQL conference in Europe, thrown by my co-host, Johannes Schickling and GraphQL. Please check it out. We were giving out discount codes, GraphQL Radio. So without further ado, let's get into your talk. So Realtime has been blowing up in the last year and a half. We have frameworks coming out that do this. Remember Horizon, there's like Deep Stream. Then you have the old players like Meteor, and then you have the bare bones solutions, Socket.io, things like that. Now, those are all just technologies that help you, that glue things together for you, right? How does GraphQL kind of change the way we look at subscriptions in real time?
Yes. I think for us, we have I just want to kind of pull out some of the initial benefits that we can see in this particular application area. Is that, as I said, we have a thick client, and we have mobile applications, and we have the web. And what we're looking to do on the grander scheme of things is to kind of have these devices in a ubiquitous kind of network of devices. So you have automatic discovery of, so I'm on my phone here, and my phone automatically detects that this laptop is connected to, or either connected to the same network or just over Bluetooth, detect that it's present here. I can then automatically discover certain capabilities that our laptop has. For instance, the laptop might be connected to a real broadcast stream from the game. Yeah. So I might be able to automatically detect that through GraphQL subscriptions and pull that stream up automatically on my device. And then I might also have that this device has tagging capabilities. So I might go in and actually tag certain events during the game. I can tag certain things like 3-point makes and fouls and stuff in basketball. And the idea then is that my laptop can also detect what capabilities my device has and subscribe to anything that's interested in. So that can then detect that this has tagging capabilities and detect the stream of events coming through from that. And a third domain as well, especially in Elite, is that we have third-party data providers and also potentially third-party hardware suppliers. And they often want to hook into our systems to say that they want to either feed data directly into our analysis stream that kind of goes hand in hand with the video stream, or they could potentially also want to take action based on certain events. So like, say a camera provider wants to do a certain thing about its parameters based on a certain event coming through the system or certain tracking data or something. They could also kind of then subscribe to those streams that reside in the system. And the way we kind of want to use subscriptions in that setting is that both obviously for streaming that data and streaming so it wasn't the video, but kind of those capabilities and those high-level data entities. We also want to kind of have that as an abstraction around the discovery piece as well.
Sure.
So we have like a generic library. So whatever you plug in your macOS app, your Windows app, Android app, iOS app, or anything else, you have a unified interface into discovering devices. So maybe a Mac has bonjour capabilities and an iOS device has bonjour capabilities. And that's then like neatly abstracted away behind that subscription model. So you're essentially listening to your own subscription on your device and like, I'm interested in devices, and for every devices I want their capabilities. And if the capability, like using that polymorphically, like if it's a capture capability, I'm interested in the feed URL and certain parameters around that. If it's a tagging capability, I'm interested in a different stream of data and so on.
What was the hardest part about, building this abstraction and kind of like, making sure it works consistently across different OSs?
So we're still in the process of figuring that out. To be honest. So we're pretty early on in the process of building this out. This is kind of like a grand vision for us to know. So we're taking step by step. So there's a lot to still figure out around it. I think in general, what we find ourselves doing is that we have this desktop application that is quite isolated from the rest of our product offering. And it kind of ties into the bigger picture of bringing these product lines together in one ecosystem and making them work seamlessly together.
Awesome. So let's get into more about the technical details of a GraphQL subscription. I think Robert Zhu from ReactConf had a nice little presentation about subscriptions in GraphQL. And he went in and described that there are two primary ways to do subscriptions or to do reactivity real time in GraphQL. One is event-based subscriptions, and the other is live query. Now, we haven't seen any live query examples on the market yet, and I'm not sure that it's actually advocated to do live query. I know the Apollo team is working on live query examples. I know Facebook Boston is working on live query examples. From my experience is everything has been very event-based subscriptions. And would you say that your platform works the same way?
Yeah, I would say so far we're definitely focusing on the event-based nature of things. I can see us considering more of a live query approach for someone like, say for instance, a tagging session, right? So my mobile device, if I suddenly come in as part of the game, or maybe come in during or after the first quarter of a basketball game, and I want to start getting that data. Obviously, I want to make an initial request for getting the data up until this point, but then I also want to make the subsequent subscription of getting any new data coming into that tagging session or the session of analysis data coming through. So that's one example where I can see like live queries being a better fit for that model. But if you think about discovery and things like that, that's probably going to be more of an event-based model because like once you're there, anything coming through from that point, like it depends on how much historical data that you're interested in as well. Like you want to set the number of round trip that you need to make. So whether you want that initial state together with any subsequent events, or if you're just interested in everything that happens from this point onwards. Yeah.
So whenever I think of real time, I think about performance costs, right? Because it's not free, and I feel like sometimes we talk about real time like it's really cool, but we don't really talk about what it costs us to achieve these features, right? Now, for something like your product, I see real time working out as almost a necessity for the type of fan I am of sports and the type of data, how fresh I want it. For websites that are maybe listings or very content heavy, real time kind of doesn't make any sense, right? Where do you think real time should be? Like, what kind of products do you think should use real time? And that's my question right now, and I have a follow-up question after that.
Okay, yeah. So I think there's one interesting area, I guess, that Facebook has already demonstrated, just back to the the real-timeness of data on a web page, right?
Yeah.
And that's talking back to perceived speed. So if you think about the Facebook feed, right? The loading the initial, basically just the essence of whatever you need to show those newsfeed items, and then you can backload and defer execution or defer fetching, I guess, of any comments and likes and any additional content that kind of enriches that experience. So that's definitely a use case of real time, even if in general web is kind of not necessarily the biggest demander of that kind of functionality. I think, I guess it's quite a broad setting, right? For desktop applications, as you say, like for our Elite offering, it's kind of a necessity. Like, how can we provide that data as quickly as possible, and how can we provide priority or assign certain priorities to different data items as well? Because obviously, during the game, the most important thing is probably the video.
Yeah.
You got to be able to review what happens over the last 3 seconds almost instantaneously. Like, one of the use cases is medical personnel want to go in and review whether it's the risk of concussion after a certain incident on the pitch. So that also poses different priorities on that, and that's also kind of to perceived performance also is a reflection of that, right? So how quickly or how long can you wait until you need that data in our use cases? Don't know if that answers your question, but
No, that answers it fine. So follow-up question is back to the performance concerns. So you guys are, streaming a lot of data to your users, and what kind of performance hiccups have you experienced, and how do you mitigate those?
Yeah, so again, we have kind of 2 different domains right now. The web is one, and I think I'll leave that to last because that's where we've had the most experience. The lead space with this real time is, as I said, it's pretty early phase, and it's a more constrained domain as well, because you're normally on a dedicated network. Like, some of our clients there have a requirement that they need to be on a dedicated hardwired network. Mm-hmm. And also, as being one team, you have more control of, like, if you control the whole hardware setup and everything, you can scope that out to fit your needs, basically. So that's probably less of a concern in that kind of application domain. So I probably won't touch too much on that if you're cool with that answer. On the web, on the other side, on the other hand, we've definitely run into a few hiccups. I mentioned earlier about this service-to-service communication that we have going on with the microservice architecture. And not all of that is cached or optimized for optimal data flow. And obviously, with this entity model, very objective view on our data sets, that doesn't necessarily always map onto the highest performance, right? Mm-hmm. And we've not been as advanced yet to kind of really adopt a proper data loader on our backend, but we're definitely starting to use Redis more and more to optimize those critical paths.
Yeah.
Back to my previous point about, like, abstraction in general, we started building this out, giving the data entities a fair bit of thought, especially on our recent endeavors. And what that's allowed us to do is to kind of start measuring performance. So we have a sort of like an optics framework in-house that allows us to track the performance of these inter-service network calls. Nice. And what ends up, so we get a full trace of that. So we've had several phases of doing audits onto very frequently used network calls and try to kind of people optimize some of those bits and introduce caching where it makes sense, right? I would say, like, we're far off being proactive about some of these things by this time, but, like, we're definitely thinking, like, longer horizon, how we can start mitigating some of those issues, and especially for new development as well, like, try to lay the land a bit more so we're not running into those issues in the future. We're trying to move quickly and provide the value we can and remove some of the friction between back end and front end, and then kind of taking a retroactive view onto that architecture that we build out to try to optimize that subsequently.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I had the same approach. Originally, we had this optics-like thing going on, and if you're new to GraphQL and you want a good tracking experience, optics is a great product to use. But for a bigger company and a maybe more preferred feature set, you might want to roll your own because you have more control. In my own experience, we instrumented all of our resolvers and logged all their elapsed time, the elapsed time, their arguments, the time, when it was called, things like that. And we actually graph those. We put those in InfluxDB, and we graph those in Grafana. So we can, we may not know the performance characteristics going out the gate, but once we have enough data, we can understand what the data access actually is, and how high or what times are the response times high, what are they low, and that's kind of how you can adjust. And subscription is not tracked. It's tracked a little bit differently, and especially across services like you guys do. But all those things can be tracked, and I always preach this on every show that we talk about performance. You can't fix what you can't measure. So you got to measure everything, and then you can fix something.
Yeah, definitely. And we were quite lucky as well because we had this tracing framework already in place before we started adopting GraphQL, and essentially we kind of see how the backend logic reflects the actual GraphQL query, right? So we easily spot some of those adverse effects of oh, hang on, this query is now fetching team by team by just one ID at a time instead of batching those requests up as one.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a pretty easy thing to go in and do. You add a new service-to-service endpoint that allows you to fetch in a batch instead and things like that. But it definitely it varies a lot as well based on the client and how they decide to fetch the data. So it's an interesting and ongoing investigation and audit for our.
I think that's for everyone too. So we're winding down on our last question here. So for all the viewers and people that are going to be at GraphQL Europe, what's one takeaway you want to leave them with?
It's not what I'm going to say for my final words during my lightning talk. I think one thing that we see over and over again, I know many people have mentioned this, but investing some time up front to really think about what your world look like.
Yeah.
In the GraphQL domain, what's the schema like? What are your types or what are your entities? Don't think too much about how they resemble a specific workflow or application, but think about what entities do you actually have. Go through object-oriented design and kind of think properly through that up front. That will save you a lot of pain down the line. Awesome. I think that's definitely the biggest learning that we've had along the way.
Nice. Cool. So that pretty much wraps up this type of speaker spotlight. Just want to thank you so much, Tommy, for being on the show today. I'm really excited to share all this information with everybody out there. Thanks for being on the show. Guys, remember GraphQL Europe is coming out, and there will be conference videos shortly after. This video will probably come up before the conference starts, and I really hope to see everybody there. So thank you and have a good day.